Hello and welcome to the lecture for week 5 of the online UWC short course on social entrepreneurship, organized in collaboration with UWC International. Sadly, this is the last lecture for the course. To help us think about making our projects a reality, we are looking at pitching your idea. You have your ideas, business plans, but how do you tell the world about them? How do you pitch to investors for support? What should you include in a video pitch to investors and supporters? Our speaker this week is UWC Atlantic College alum Yasmin Belo-Osagie.
That's good.
Who has considerable experience in finance, hospitality, and the world of entrepreneurship. Among other things, Yasmin has worked as a sous chef in the Mandarin Oriental Hotel in Hong Kong for consultancy firm McKinsey & Company, and perhaps more significantly for us, Yasmin is a co-founder of the women's entrepreneurship organization, She Leads Africa. Today, Yasmin is going to talk to us about her story and setting up She Leads Africa, as well as her experience running She Leads Africa's annual pitch competitions, and talk to us a bit about what makes a great pitch. Don't forget to ask questions in the Q&A panel, and we'll come to these at the end of Yasmin's presentation. And we're really looking forward to hearing from you today. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you, Yasmin.
Thank you so much, Robin, for that introduction. So really nice to meet all of you, and thanks so much for joining. So in terms of kind of structuring the course, what I'm going to do is start off with maybe just a little bit about like She Leads Africa, so you just have a little bit of context from sort of where it is that I'm coming from. And then I'm going to kind of move into, what makes like a good pitch, and really kind of like looking at it from an investor's perspective, and then we'll go into kind of like, the exact details. And what I'll try to do is also kind of give you like examples from some of like the pitch decks or some of the entrepreneurs that like I've interacted with. So, I think Robin gave a pretty good background. I mean, I'm from Nigeria. I'm half Nigerian, half Ghanaian, grew up in Nigeria, was at boarding school in England for a while, then went to university in the States. After that, I took a year off. I thought I was going to be a chef, went to culinary school, and then ended up actually at McKinsey & Company in their Lagos office. I was there for 2 years, mainly focused on strategy work and sort of working with organizations to develop long-term growth plans. Then left and started She Leads Africa with a colleague of mine from McKinsey. So at She Leads, what we do is we say we want to work with high growth female entrepreneurs on the continent, because we found that sort of most organizations that were working with female entrepreneurs tended to focus on, how do you take a low income woman and help her set up micro businesses? We think that's very important, but I think that part of the problem is that actually micro businesses don't really drive job creation. So we wanted to create an organization that actually, works very largely and provides resources for women in the SME space, but then actually identifies women in the SME space who we believe have the potential and the capability to actually grow and scale their businesses, and then work with them on that journey. So I think that my experience, which is kind of most relevant to this course, is that, we organize an annual pitch competition. Actually, the first one was last year, and this year we're very much in full swing of the second one. And so, I've read maybe about like 1,000 pitch decks and engaged with entrepreneurs from like across the continent, which is kind of the perspective that I'm coming from. Now, in terms of sort of what makes a good pitch and a good pitch deck, I think, there are two slightly different elements. One of them is about sort of the content, and then of course the second one is about the delivery. I'll focus first on the content, and then we can chat a little bit about delivery towards the end. But what I think is really important, first of all, is to kind of take a step back and really think about, okay, what is the purpose of a pitch deck, and kind of look at and really understand sort of the perspective of an investor. Now, I think that, when people think about investors, you always think someone in a suit and it's, very intense, yada, yada, yada. But I think that it's very important to think about them as people first. Now, you either have people who are investing their personal money. So in that case, there are people who oftentimes they think that this investment is maybe what's going to fund their retirement. It's going to fund, their children going to university. I think you have to understand that perspective. If you're an institutional investor, well, then you actually have a fiduciary right to the people who've given you money to kind of make sure that the investments that you're making actually make sense. Now, and I say that because I think it's sort of important to understand, okay, if you are an investor, put yourself in their perspective and you're giving someone money that you need and you really hope that money is going to come back, what are the sort of questions that you would ask them? What is the sort of information that you would need them to provide to make you believe that they are actually someone who you believe should get your money? I think that perspective is very important, and then sort of drives and determines how you think about putting the information together. Because I think oftentimes the problem is that as an entrepreneur, you're locked into your business, you know so much about it, you're fully in it, and you forget that like an investor doesn't know anything about you. They don't know who you are, they don't know what your business is. You might be convinced it's a good idea, but you have to convince them. So really the burden of proof and responsibility is on you. So just to get some context. So now I'll kind of go through like the different elements of the pitch deck. There are 1,000 ways that people cut it. So what I say is not law. There are different ways that people do it. They order it differently. But I think this should just give you like a very rough sense. And what I can actually do is sort of send you some other online resources. I'll send them to Robin, and perhaps you can send them out where you can kind of find more of this information, because there are multiple different perspectives and ways you can do this. Now, so I think that the first thing that's most important, which people put up front, is the problem. And you hear people talk about this all the time. Investors or entrepreneurs exist to solve problems. To give you a perfect example, we have an entrepreneur in our network. She has something called heat-free hair. And what it is, it's she makes hair weaves for women of color that actually match like their natural hair texture, because the problem is a lot of like their hair weaves and extensions that are being sold are like dead straight, and that's actually not what our hair looks like. So that's the problem she's identified. Women of African descent want to have hair or extensions that suits their natural hair, and there isn't someone who's providing. Okay, now the next logical place is, okay, you say that's a problem, so what's the solution? And her solution is, okay, I'm going to create a hair weave brand that actually creates weaves that match, natural hair. Very simple. That's the problem, that's the solution. Now, okay, what am I thinking? So I'm an investor, I'm like, okay, cool, interesting problem, I'm convinced by the problem. Cool, you seem to have a solution, but how many people like have this problem? So if the only people that have this problem are like you and your mom, I don't know, maybe that's not too interesting for me, because how much can I really sell to you and your mom? Okay, so that's when you go into the third part, which is the market opportunity. I'm going to talk a lot about this in a little bit more detail, and because I think people always want you to size the market, and the problem is I know a lot of people watching this are kind of coming from developing or emerging economies where oftentimes you don't really have the data, like you don't know what is the size of like the hair extension market. So I wanted to give you kind of 2 quick ways in which you might be able to guesstimate, right? Because a guesstimate is always better than nothing. And actually, this is a lot of the work that I did whilst I was in McKinsey, where you're sort of trying to reach like some sort of like logical conclusion. It won't be perfect, but it will be better than like absolutely no information. And I'll give you another example. We have an entrepreneur where she has something called Beauty Rev. And it's an online platform where it's based in Nigeria, where you can go and buy makeup online, because a lot of the times like you can't find it. And in her pitch deck, she didn't really include like exact details on what the size of the market was. And that was based on, look, I really couldn't find this information, and that's fair. But I think there are 2 ways in which I suggested to her, and me and my co-founder, that, okay, this might be a way you should think about it. One of them was saying, okay, look, I might be able to find the information for the global, or maybe let me choose the US market. I might be able to go to the US market and say, okay, this is how much women there spend on makeup. And then maybe what I say is, okay, what percentage is like Nigerian GDP of US GDP? Maybe it's 5%. So I take 5% of what the US market for makeup is, and that can give me a very rough sense of, okay, in Nigeria, this is roughly what it could be. Again, this is something that's not perfect, but if you think that GDP is a metric that measures consumption, why not? And I get to some sort of answer. And that's a very top-down sort of logic. The other way you could think about it is building it bottom up. And I might say, okay, let me look at women in Nigeria. Over the course of a year, sort of what are the basket of makeup goods that they would buy? So I don't know, maybe I'll buy 1 foundation, 1 mascara, 1 lipstick over the year. Now, how much does that cost? Maybe it's $20. Now I multiply that by the number of women who I think will be sort of the target demographic for my product. So that might be, the number of, maybe upper and middle class women, because those are the only people who I would believe would be able to afford it. And then, usually what will happen is I'll get these two numbers, and between those two numbers, I can come to some sort of reasonable estimate of what I really believe the market opportunity should be. So I would always push you, always try and put some sort of number to the market opportunity, make it as local as possible, because frankly, if I'm an investor and you tell me that the global market is 20 billion, I don't care, because you're in Nigeria, you're not serving like the global market. Okay, so the next thing is, you've now told me, okay, here's the problem, here's the solution, and guess what? It's like a huge problem that a whole bunch of people have, and if we solve it, we can make a lot of money. Cool. So now I'm like, okay, well, maybe there are a whole bunch of other people that are solving the problem that you are saying that you're solving. So we get to the competition piece. And very specifically, I kind of want to understand, what is it that makes your product unique amongst all these competitors? I mean, first of all, I want to understand that that there are competitors out there. And a lot of times people will say, oh, I don't have any competitors. You do, just think creatively about who they may be. And when you talk about what makes you unique, it doesn't necessarily always have to be about the product. It can also be, for example, about the business model or like your operations. Now, I'll take you back to, I'll give you two examples. One of them is, we have an entrepreneur called, her business is called Kamakini. And she makes swimwear for, women in Africa. And, her point was, there aren't a lot of brands that make swimwear for like the African female body type, which is a little bit different to people kind of like from other places. So what's unique about her business is the product. It's a product, the way she cuts the sizes, maybe a little bit like bigger around the hips, etc., etc. Now, if I take the example of someone like Heat Free Hair, which is the entrepreneur who makes the natural hair weaves, what is unique about her is not necessarily that she makes these weaves, because there are other people who do that. What's unique about her are sort of her operations. Now, she owns the entire supply chain. So she actually goes to China, she has her team in China that like makes the weaves, and then like she creates them. So she owns that entire process. Now, why that's interesting to me is because that means that she gets higher margins, right? Because she's not going and buying from someone and essentially being like a reseller. She actually like owns the entire process. So then that's what's unique about it. It's not necessarily that, oh, I'm the only person in this market, but it's that, for every one weave I sell, maybe they're $300, the other people make $50, but I make $150. So I'm going to be able to be a slightly more profitable company. So you can think about sort of what makes you unique in that way. Okay, now we've gone through all that. You told me this, you told me about the competition, and then there we get to show me the money, right? So how is this going to make money? Now, these next three parts that I'm going to talk about, and I'll speak about them in two parts, sorry, revenue model, sort of customer acquisition, and also sort of distribution. Now, the detail that you go into this is going to depend a little bit on your business, right? So, if you're selling hair weaves, it's very obvious to me how you make money. You sell it, they deposit the money, it's done. Whereas, for a lot of people, it might be, advertising revenues. It might be something which is, I think, not immediately obvious. So I think you kind of need to take a judgment call on where you need to dig in most deeply. But, first of all, it's still important to say, okay, this is actually how I plan to make money. The next thing I say is, okay, you say you know how to make money, but okay, you say maybe if I sell this to like 1,000 people, I'll make $10. Cool. So like, how are you going to find those like 1,000 people? That's where you talk about your customer acquisition strategy, and somewhat linked to this is your distribution strategy. But again, like it's dependent on your business, because if, for example, you're building an app, distribution is very different from sort of if you're selling like swimwear, because that includes sort of different distribution channels. Now, when people think about customer acquisition, it's really sort of around, okay, how are you going to find the people that are going to buy your product? So that will be somewhat a mix of, it's very much linked to sort of like marketing almost. So how will people hear about your product and how will they decide to choose your product? When you think about distribution, it's okay, once people have heard about your product and they say, okay, I want to buy that, how are they actually going to get it, right? So if I take, Kamakini, for example, who she makes swimwear, customer acquisition strategy for her was, she was saying, okay, she partners with, to give some context, a lot of sort of alcohol manufacturers in Nigeria host a lot of these like beach parties. And so she's saying, okay, how I'm going to acquire customers is I'm actually going to partner with them. So when they host beach parties, like I will have, like models wearing my swimwear there. And that's kind of how customers are going to hear about my thing. Now, her distribution strategy would be saying, okay, well, I am going to sell in physical stores, but then I'm also going to sell online. So there's the piece about, okay, this is how people hear about me. And then there's also the piece about, okay, once they've heard about me, this is how they actually buy my product. Now, moving on from that, the next thing is, I want to kind of get into like the real, okay, how much money do you really believe you'll make? So I obviously want to see your financials. Financials are important, and everyone will tell you that. I think I was reading up actually yesterday, and they were saying that on average, the financials are the financials page is where investors actually spend the most money, and it's definitely really true, because yes, you've told me all this like great stuff, but it really comes down to, okay, how much money do you really believe you can make, and how profitable is your company really going to be? Now, the thing with financials is, being completely honest, I mean, as a startup, it's like I mean, you know, but you don't know, right? But I think that it's important to show an investor that you've actually taken the time out to really think about not just how much money you can make, but how much money you need to spend to make that money. And I think that, you know, some of the things that I always encourage people to do, I don't kind of want to go into a really detailed budgeting thing, but one of the things that I would always encourage you to do is to sense check your numbers. So we had something where someone said, okay, you know, I'm going to get 100 customers and I'm going to spend $10. Cool, so you're maybe spending $10 to acquire each customer. And then 3 years down the line, they're saying, okay, I'm going to get 200 customers, but I'm going to be spending like, I don't know, maybe they'll say $50. So I'm like, okay, well, now you're spending much less to acquire customers. Well, now it's like, what, like $4 per customer. Why is that happening? You know, you might say, okay, well, really, as I scale, it's just a little bit easier. I can get more people at like a cheaper price. But I think that you should always kind of sense check like a couple of ratios. So one might be customer acquisition. One might be around like your profit margin. Sometimes I'll see people's financials where, I mean, they'll have margins of like 10% at the beginning, and then suddenly in year 2, it goes to 30%. And I'm like, well, that doesn't really make sense. It might be true, but if that is indeed true, you need to explain that, because left to itself, I'm like, well, you say you're not doing anything differently, but suddenly all your ratios are changing. And to me, that makes it seem like you haven't really thought through this very deeply. The other important part of the financials is that for a lot of people, if you can't show backwards financials, so maybe you're just very, very early or you're not making money yet, you can still show traction. So I think people become very wedded to money, but actually there are a lot of companies where they make losses for like the first like 3-5 years. And investors don't mind because you're making traction in other ways. I mean, if you look at a lot of, for example, the internet businesses, a lot of like social media businesses, they actually run at a loss, but investors are fine because they're able to demonstrate traction in terms of, you know, the number of, you know, customers, for example, that they have, or, you know, the number of people they have signed up. So in addition to financials, if you feel like your financial information isn't like interesting or juicy enough, I would always encourage you to think about, okay, what are the other metrics that I can use to demonstrate traction and to demonstrate that, okay, this is actually something that could work. Again, they're going to be very unique to your business. They could be around, you know, the number of, you know, customers that, you know, you have. Sometimes people can use kind of social media type stats, and sort of the assumption being, look, I have a really big social media following, so it's going to be easy for me to acquire customers. It can be a little fluffy, so if you can give something that actually has like real kind of like facts and figures, numbers, it would be a little bit easier. Unless like your business model is around just saying, I just need a lot of eyeballs to make money, which is like slightly different. But I would always say, you know, if you feel like, you know, financials aren't good enough, there are other ways in which you can show traction and show that you're actually doing something that's good. Then the next piece is, okay, I want to know what your ask is. So, you know, how much money are you looking to raise? And I want to know sort of how you're going to spend that money. A lot of the times, ultimately, like an investor, there's a lot of, the relationship is based on trust, right? Because to be honest, once I give you my money, I mean, you can decide to do with it what you will. But I want to understand that you have thought critically about sort of how it is that you want to spend that money. And usually when you tell me how you're going to spend that money, I have a good understanding of whether you truly understand what it means to run the business it is that you're running, right? So if you are someone who you're saying, okay, I mean, let's take Kamakini, for example, the swimwear company. If she says to me, okay, well, actually, I want to do my own beach parties. And I'm just kind of like, well, that seems like a really expensive way to like acquire customers if she tells me that's where she's going to spend my money. So I'm like, I'm not super convinced. Whereas if she tells me, okay, what I'm going to be doing is I've noticed that, you know, I can find a cheap way for people to hear about my product, but ultimately I need to make sure that, it's distributed properly. So what I'm going to do is sort of spend money on, I don't know, maybe like renting out space in physical stores or something like that. Then that kind of gives me a little bit more insight into her strategy. And that's why sort of the ask and then the breakdown of the ask is so important. Because linking back to my earliest point and sort of saying, okay, what would you need someone to show you to give them your money? You want to get as much sort of insight into their thinking as possible. You want to understand how it is they think about their business. Do they really kind of understand where they need to prioritize, where they need to spend money? Because you don't want someone who's just going to be spraying your money everywhere, because it's just not helpful. Now, the final point is the team. And this is like so important, and people really don't pay as much attention to it, and it's so sad, because all of this is all good and well, but everyone will tell you that, look, I can make anything. I mean, I've been a consultant, I can make anything look good on paper, but what really matters is execution. And so I want to believe that you are the person, you very specifically on your team, you're the team that can pull off what it is that you said you're going to pull off. And I'll give you a good example, actually, from like She Leads Africa. So very early on, we thought, okay, what we want to do is actually go out and raise like a VC fund. So we want to go and get money from people, and then we're going to say we're going to invest in businesses. Now, the problem with that is that, I mean, neither me or my co-founder have really ever invested in a business. We had not at the time really had any sort of like private equity experience or sort of VC experience, or any sort of work experience that would lead someone to believe that you have a really strong understanding of what it means to invest. So we got to the point where we're like, okay, well, maybe it really actually doesn't make sense to do that. So we sort of changed our model, and we said, okay, what we're actually going to do is go to the entrepreneurs and say, okay, what we're going to do is offer you guys something for the finalists from our pitch competition. We essentially become an accelerator program where we take an equity position in your business, and through that, because we're taking that, we actually give you a whole bunch of products or services, whether it's around sort of helping you develop your long-term strategy, it's about helping you find talent, it's about sort of helping you or working with you to connect with investors, it's about making sure that people hear about your business, and we've helped a lot of the PR angle. Now, for that, our team has a much stronger sell, right? Because, my partner used to work in marketing. We are both sort of strategy consultants, so we're used to working with businesses and improving them. Because of the work that we've done at She Leads Africa, we've had a lot of engagement with investors, and a lot of the times investors sort of come to us and say, okay, do you have any interesting businesses that we would like to look at? So suddenly our sell as a team makes it a lot more believable that we're actually going to be able to pull off the business that we say we're going to be able to pull off. So for me, actually, outside of financials, I think that, and I mean, to be honest, maybe even more so than financials, I would say that the team is the single most important thing for me. Because if you have a team that you can believe in, I mean, the plans will change, right? Your customer acquisition might change, your distribution strategy might change. But once I know that there is a team that is competent, they're able to think critically, they're passionate about their business, they're fully bought in, then I think I'm a lot more sort of inclined to, invest in them, or to believe that they're going to be able to run a successful business. So yeah, that is pretty much sort of what I would expect to see in a pitch deck. I've been talking at you for like 25 minutes, so I'm going to speak really briefly on delivery. Delivery, just keep it simple. I've seen some pitch decks. I mean, someone sent us, it was like a video, and it was like the Matrix. That's the only way I can. It was like, it was swerving, and it was zooming in and out, and it was. I got to the end and I was like, this is so cool, but to this day, I don't understand what that business does. Keep it simple. Second thing is, try to make sure that your pages aren't too dense. They say on average, investors probably spend about 4 minutes looking at pitch deck. I mean, I usually, for me, it's click. It's fairly quick. I want to be able to absorb the information very quickly. So if you've essentially just have a Word document which you've now transposed into like PowerPoint, that's just not something that's going to get people's attention. So I think be mindful of the fact that, I mean, as I said, I've read 1,000 pitch decks, so be mindful of the fact that the people who you're sending stuff to are reading hundreds and hundreds of pitch decks. So you don't want something that's going to be too long. I think you can do a good pitch deck in 10 to 15 pages, and you definitely don't want something that's too text heavy. Now, if you're doing sort of your pitch, if it's live, you want to make sure, of course, I mean, body language is important. You want to make sure you're energetic. You want to make sure that it's clear that you're passionate about your business. But I think that one is a little bit tricky because sort of everyone has very different sort of presentation skills and styles. But if you can actually record yourself doing a pitch and then watch it, I think that that's always really helpful because it kind of gives you a good perspective of how people can see you. So yeah, that's the end of my course. I think I'll say again the 10 elements just so you guys can remember it. I can also happy to type them up and send it to you. But the first one is the problem. Then there's the solution, market opportunity, competition and what makes you unique, your revenue model, customer acquisition strategy, your distribution strategy, financials and traction to date, your ask and the breakdown of how you're going to spend that money, and then finally the team. So thank you so much for listening, and please let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you so much, Yasmin. That was very interesting. I'm sorry. Do you have any headphones? Feedback?
I don't have headphones, but I can hear you very well.
Okay. I can also hear myself. That's the only thing.
Oh no. Okay, I don't have. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. It might self-correct. Yeah, that was just a bit disconcerting. No, but that was really good. And I think it's a really great place for us to sort of to end the course as well, because you've done such a comprehensive sort of summary of what is actually needed when pitching to investors, which I think is really that's some of our participants have some great ideas, but including myself, none of us, or not many of us, have any experience actually in that respect, pitching for money. So I think we can probably just start with the questions in the Q&A app, and well, first we have one which is from Sheila, who is asking, in your view, at what point is a startup project or initiative ripe for pitching its idea for financial backing? I.e., at what stage should the pitch be presented? After all the planning is done? Or should you have a track record? Or
Yeah. So it depends. There are a couple of things it depends on. Sorry, a lot of my answers are going to be it depends, which I think is very frustrating. But there are a couple of things. So number one is how much money you need, and can you actually, first of all, it's what do you need, and it depends on what your needs are. So for a lot of people, because here's the thing, if you get an investor very early, the value of your business is much smaller. And so I think, I'm so sorry. If you get an investor sort of very early on, the amount that they will give you for whatever percentage equity you're giving up is going to be smaller because your business isn't as valuable. So you may want to push it as late as possible until you really need the money. Now, of course, with investors, it's not just about money. A lot of the times you're bringing expertise. So you might say, look, yes, I could get more money if I waited, but I believe that this is someone who is going to bring some sort of expertise that I don't have, that's so beneficial to me that I'm willing to give that up. That could be a decision that you make. So that's the first piece. Now, the second piece is around sort of, is it just about when you have a plan? I think it's always best to have traction. Some people will take, and I think, first of all, it depends on your market, right? In the US, I think because the venture capital industry is so developed that there's so much money just flashing around, people can raise money on an idea. In Africa, like, it's not gonna happen. Like, investors like this, the VC, the industry there is so nascent that people want to see something that has a little bit of traction. I would be shocked if you found someone who has been able to like raise money from someone who's maybe not a family member or friend or someone who knows them really well from just an idea. So I would always say that you should have developed some sort of traction before you actually try to go out and raise money. And that decision on sort of when to raise money should be guided from, okay, how much do you feel comfortable giving up, at what price? Do you feel like, they're bringing something other than money? There are a couple of different factors that I think that you would need to consider. But I would generally say, like, people always say, try and do it for as long as possible as you can by yourself, because you'll be able to improve the value of your company much more. And I think that oftentimes investors kind of like to see that you're working with someone who's really put their all in it before they've decided to raise money. But I think it really, so the answer is it depends.
Definitely. So in some ways, it instead of going to investors first, it could be more more useful actually developing your team and sort of looking at how we can actually, have something to show.
I agree. And I would also say that sometimes too much money early on in your business is actually not good for you because it makes you wasteful. A lot of the times when you start with very little, like you're forced to, I think, be creative, you're forced to do things, I think, where a lot of the times you'll be like, oh, I'll just spend money on that. But actually there might have been a way to do it if it was free. So a lot of the times actually not having too much money is oftentimes very good for you. Very
interesting. Okay, so let's go to the next question, which is from Azahar, who is asking, what would be your advice on a pitch video? I mean, you did mention the videos, but do you have sort of 3 key aspects that you should include in a pitch video to make it attractive and efficient?
So I think in a pitch video, obviously it's very hard to show your financials, yada yada yada. But what I would say is the purpose of a lot of the times I wouldn't want to see, this is personal, I wouldn't just want to see a pitch video. Usually I think that the pitch video is in addition to your pitch deck. And really what the pitch video does for me is to bring the pitch deck to life. Because reading something on paper is very different from sort of seeing someone, you see them being engaged and excited about the pitch. A lot of the times you can actually see their operations. I think that if you can kind of show people your business, it's always helpful. I mean, everyone talks about the difference between telling someone and showing them something. So ultimately, I would always say that I see a pitch video as a supplement to a pitch deck. I do not all see it as an alternative, to be perfectly honest. I don't know, maybe that's a personal preference. But in terms of sort of what would make it attractive, I would say I kind of want to see you being able to speak about your business. And if there are certain things that you can show in the pitch video about some of your operations, that would also be really cool because then it just brings everything to life for me. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
No, I think it definitely did. And I mean, as you said, it's probably different for every investor, but that it makes sense. You couldn't describe all the financials in a video; it just wouldn't be practical. So in that sense, you can kind of complement the written and the video.
I mean, so to give you perfect examples, for Cheerleads Africa, for the pitch competition, we ask you, there's an online application, but we ask for a pitch deck, we ask for a pitch video, and then usually we also have a financials template that we ask you to fill out.
Okay, yeah. And is that sort of, I guess is that fairly standard for?
I think all pitch videos do things all pitch competitions do things very differently. I mean, so I know a lot of investors, they just want a pitch deck. They're like, I'm not trying to see any video. They probably wouldn't even have a way that you could submit a video. Yeah. So I think it's just very, very, it's very varied and very dependent.
Okay. The next question, okay, I don't quite understand it. Yeah, and I think is it asking why is a video important rather than just standard pitch, maybe without a video? Can you do you think a video could clinch the sort of support from an investor or from your own personal point of view, or do you think actually it's not? I mean, could you get away without one?
Yeah, definitely. A video is not, it's not necessary. It's nice, and a lot of times it does bring things to life. I get to see you, and because ultimately they really care about you as an entrepreneur. You're the person who's building the business. So sometimes I do like to see it, but it's not critical and not necessary. There are people who got into the finals of our pitch competition without submitting a pitch video. So it's not critical, but I think it's always a nice to have.
But it's definitely not sort of the thing you should spend all your time on or money.
If you have a great idea that an investor really thinks is going to make money, he will not care that you did not send him a video at all. If your is so he definitely will be it's fine, we'll do that, because in any case they are going to talk to you at some point. So the pitch deck is really just to kind of grab their attention, and it's just that sometimes people are grabbed. Yes, you can send people text, but visuals, I think we're in a very visual age, so something visual helps grab their attention. And this sort of pitch deck, pitch video, it's really about grabbing someone's attention, because you're going to have 1,000 follow-on like conversations after that. Like, it's not like they'll just read your pitch deck and give you money. That like never happens. But it's just to give them like a taster and get them excited about it, excited enough to respond to your email and ask for a meeting. That's really the purpose of what you're trying to do.
Okay, and I wonder, in fact, building on that, this is just something I've thought of, but what are the best ways of actually that you found of reaching out to investors? I mean, is it through pitch competitions like She Leads Africa, or actually last week we had Tammy Wan, who also went to UWC Atlantic, and she was saying that actually sometimes it's more about who you know than what you know. I mean, is that often the case? And if you don't think you have that network that you can reach out to, how can you kind of get around that?
Of course. Okay. So, I mean, first of all, I think that a good way to think about that would be to think about like the different sources of investment. So you kind of have personal angel investors, you have maybe a lot of these kind of like accelerator type models, and then you have funds. Now, a personal sort of angel investor, I mean, like, you have to find them. So a lot of the times it will be someone who knows someone who like knows someone. Sometimes they'll kind of have, a lot of them sort of like attend demo days or pitch competitions where they try to find deals. So I mean, there's something, for example, called like Demo Day, which I mean, like there's something called Demo Africa, which they're hosting it in Nigeria this year, and the whole idea is, you apply, and there are a whole bunch of investors in the room, and you come and you pitch in front of them. So that's like a good way to do that, if you can't find them personally. Then of course there are the accelerators, and usually they'll sort of have like an application process. I mean, you can think about something like Y Combinator of 500 startups. Pretty simple. You go online, you apply. If they like you, they call you. You have an interview, moving on. For sort of traditional VC funds, a lot of them will have open type applications where you can send something in, but usually I would say that the best way is some sort of like introduction from someone who knows someone there, like personally, or has worked there. And that's not, it's interesting because it's more just that ultimately this is all around like data points, right? So Robin, I know you, right? So if you come to me and you say, oh, I'm building a business, yada, 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 and I go and tell, my best friend who works in a VC fund, they trust my opinion, right? So when they have the meeting with you, they're doing it as a favor to me, and because they trust my opinion. Like, they essentially have another data point on you. There's someone who they know who has said that Robin is credible. So it's not as, because I think that sometimes when you're like, oh, it's about who you know, it makes it seem like very insidious. But it's almost like it's a very natural sort of human reaction. I mean, if you're thinking about, I don't know, building, like, I don't know, hiring an interior designer, you'll probably ask your friends and be like, oh, do you know anyone, or something like that. And so that's sort of how the networks work, versus it being something where I think people are on purpose trying to shut certain people out. But I would say that if you feel like you don't have a very strong network, definitely test out the route of pitch competitions or accelerators that like allow you to apply, because those, I think, give you like a little bit like more latitude, even if you don't know anyone in the organization.
Definitely, and I wonder if do you think being a social enterprise or social entrepreneurs, does that actually, that maybe perhaps increases the sort of routes available, or do you think that that might also shut some other routes off?
I think it depends. First of all, even as a social entrepreneur, here's my thing. I don't like it when people make it seem like I or an investor should just give you money because you're doing something good. It's important because I might care about that, but I also think that it's important to show that your business can be sustainable, because honestly, you're not going to be able to do a whole bunch of good if your business runs for a year, runs out of money, and shuts down. That's just not helpful. So I think that it's still important to sort of show that the business will be able to be sustainable. It might not be able to give me crazy profits or crazy returns, but there has to be like a bare, I think, minimum. Whether or not it shuts or opens doors, I think it doesn't necessarily shut or open doors. It's more around sort of which investors you will target. So there are some sort of like, you have this new group of like impact investors. You have a new bunch of foundations. Like, I mean, I think Case Foundation, for example, has an impact investment fund. You have the one started by the guy who started eBay. My mind is completely going blank, but I will try to remember the name. It's super famous, so I don't know why I'm having black. But there are some places where they're specifically looking for things that will make money but also have a social impact. So it's more that a lot of the times, whether you're a social enterprise or not, a lot of times it does. If you're a social enterprise that's going to make a lot of, like, that can demonstrate that your business is going to be profitable, then really, like, the world is yours. Because you can go to traditional investors because you can make this is the argument, this will make sense, and you can go to impact investors, like, as well. So really, that's like the sweet spot of where, like, you want to be in. But if you don't believe that traditional investors would be interested in your business, then you just need to kind of target sort of where you go. And I think that's also, I mean, sorry, this is a bit of an aside, but it's important to understand who it is that you're pitching for money. What sort of investments do they traditionally make? What do they like? Some investors only want to do tech. If you're not in tech, they don't care whether you tell them you're going to make them $1 billion. They just want to focus on technology. That's what they feel like they understand. I think you should also be, I think, a little bit strategic about the way in which you decide to, in the way you decide which investors you kind of want to reach out to versus not. Because ultimately, you also do want someone who's going to be bringing, well, ideally more than money. So you also kind of want to be looking at, like, their expertise, like, you know, would they be able to help you with something in your business that you really do need help with? So.
Sure. And I was wondering, when you're doing your pitch and sort of building your pitch deck and everything, if you are, like, as a social enterprise, how much should you emphasize this, or is it, I mean, obviously, as you said, it depends on the investor, but it is probably unique to, let's say, a standard enterprise.
So usually, actually, I mean, so for She Leads, we actually have 2 versions of our pitch deck, and usually it's maybe you just have 2 extra pages. There's one where we don't really include, like, the full, helping African women do that, because sometimes people are like, I don't really care. So sometimes we just want to keep them a little bit focused, and so we just send this to standard one. But for people who we know that the social impact is really important, we just slot in the 2 extra pages, and then when we send it to them, we send, like, a more full pitch deck. And a lot of people do that. You kind of, not that you send different pitch decks to different people, because you obviously don't want to make it seem like you're communicating different advice, but if you know that one investor is particularly keen on something, then you can also, why not just, like, slot in a page that speaks to that. It takes like 5 minutes to make a PowerPoint page. You can put them in and out, you can mix them around.
Great. And is that you said PowerPoint, is that probably one of the best ways of actually physically creating the pitch deck?
Yeah, I think it is. Some people use Word, but Word makes you write too much, to be honest. So it's actually even somehow discipline for yourself. And I remember, like, we got it was like 10 pages in Word, and I was like so demoralized even thinking about having to read through it when you're like, oh, I have to read so many. And I know it's sad because that really should be my job, but, like, you have to remember, you know, investors are human beings as well. And, like, if you could read through, like, a 10-page PowerPoint versus, like, a 10-page detailed Word presentation. So I would always encourage push people to use PowerPoint instead. And you don't need to be, like, the fanciest person on, like, PowerPoint, just, like, you know, put the basics down there.
Yeah, I've definitely found that, because I have a tendency to write too much. So
yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so the next question is from David, and asking, what if your enterprise idea is for a service, so say education or sustainability experience, rather than a tangible consumable product? And also, where cost recovery plus the margin is more important than the return on investment per se. Do you have any distinctive advice? I'm just going to digest that second part.
Yeah, I don't know if I fully understand the question. I mean, my understanding of the question is that you are maybe a social enterprise where you're saying, okay, I'm not going to make a huge amount of money, but I will cover my costs and make a little bit more, but I'm not going to make, like, a huge like, return on the investment, I think, is my understanding of the question. The distinctive advice that I would have on that is choose your investor wisely, because some people really don't care about the social impact. They really just want to make money. So then you need to be strategic about the sort of people you decide to go and ask for money from. You would be looking more at sort of like the impact investing realm versus traditional investors who tend to care more about just straight returns.
Definitely. And I wonder if perhaps the first sort of question that David asked, he's asking about
Oh, the
services.
service. Okay. Trying to think of which service ones.
Have you had any people in She Leads Africa where rather than a sort of tangible product, they are providing services? Any of the startups that entrepreneurs that you've worked with?
Mm-hmm. We have, but they really haven't been any of my favorite yet, because the problem with a lot of service type ones is that it's very difficult to show, or it's difficult to or what I've seen is that with services, people haven't really convinced me on the ability to scale, because a lot of the times the service might be bound to like me. So let's say I'm starting like a consulting company that's really kind of like bound to like me, and there are only a certain number of hours in the day. I mean, yes, I could say I'll scale, I'll hire more consultants, yada yada yada, but a lot of the times I feel like people don't convince me on that scaling piece as well. So I would say, I'm so sorry, my phone is going crazy. Just give me a second. So I would say what is important for the service, you still need to sort of follow like the standard model. But so, I mean, tell me, okay, what's the problem, the solution, who are your competitors, market opportunity, the revenue model will be different. Services make money differently. Your customer acquisition and distribution strategy actually would probably be the same as well. To be honest, actually, most of the elements, even if you're doing a service, would be fairly similar. But I think that it's important for you to think about, okay, how am I going to scale this? Because unless if I am a social an impact investor, then I might not care about how big it gets. But if you are trying to then appeal to a traditional investor, they want to understand that your idea is like scalable. So that works as well. Is kind of like how I would think about it. So you need to think about that a little bit carefully. I'm not sure if that answered your question, but you can totally give, I think his name was David, my email if he wants to like chat in more detail, because it'd be helpful to get a little bit more sort of specifics, but I think it's very dependent.
Sure, thank you. Okay, the next video is from Uri, who's asking. The next question is from Uri, who's asking, do you remember a good video pitch story, and can you tell us why you might have liked it particularly? And I mean, you did mention some video pitches already, but do you have a favorite all-time video pitch that you experienced?
Favorite all time. Okay, I really liked the entrepreneur who did Beauty Rev, which is the online platform to buy makeup online. I mean, I liked hers because it wasn't super fancy. Like the beginning was just her kind of talking about herself and her experiences. So she used to be a makeup artist. She came to Nigeria, sort of found that she couldn't find a lot of like the products that she needed, and so that's why she decided to start the business. So I mean, immediately I think I liked her energy. I liked that she just seemed, I think, very competent, very passionate about what it was she was doing. And then what she also did was she kind of showed us like flashes of some of like the events, like, because what they do is they do a lot of like offline events online. She showed like flashes of some of the events, and so what I saw was like a full room filled with like women, and so then I'm like, okay, wow, this must be something that just gives me an indication of, okay, this is something that people are actually excited about. She showed me like the website. She just literally just had the camera pointed and like scrolled down the website, so again I could like see that. So I would say that the ones that I like the most are the ones where you see an entrepreneur who is like competent, excited, passionate. They clearly have a good understanding of what their business does. But then they also kind of show me a little bit about their business and like why I should be excited about it. So that I generally really like.
And I was wondering, do you think you talked about passion? Is that something that's is that really important for an investor to see in the person or the team that they're investing in?
No, it is, because like building a business is like the worst. I mean, it's like it's not the worst, it's great, but it's so, I mean, it's like a marathon. Like there are times when you're like I mean, there are times when I'm like, this sucks. Like, maybe this idea sucks. Maybe I just need to go back to McKinsey. Why did I leave? Oh my gosh, what am I doing? Right? And if you don't have that passion, which kind of continues to take you back to, no, I did this because I really believe that this is something that can work, then like you're just going to give up. So that's why they care about it. It's not the passion in and of itself. It's more just that because the journey is so difficult, the only way that you're going to kind of wake up every morning and keep going back to it, even when there are setbacks, when you're losing money, when people are telling you that what you're doing is stupid and crazy. It's only when like you're really passionate about it. So that's why they care about it versus, oh, I just want someone who's passionate.
Definitely. And just talking about setbacks, from your experience, what are some sort of setbacks that people should maybe expect or think could happen in their journey?
Usually, okay, so a lot of the times you thought it was a great idea and you thought everyone wanted to buy it and put it out. Maybe you put it out on like an online platform, maybe you're selling it and no one buys it. And you're like, wow, this is super awkward. That is usually something you kind of like overestimate that. Second setback is like a lot of times it's team members or not being up to scratch, not working as hard as you kind of want them to work. Another one is oftentimes sort of investors. Like a lot of times people will say that they're interested and say that they're going to give you money, and when you're now like, okay, cool, where's the check? Then suddenly they're like, oh no, I changed my mind. A lot of the times that can happen, and it's so disappointing. I mean, setbacks can be kind of regulatory and things out of your control. I mean, I think about one of our entrepreneurs from last year's pitch competition. Her name is Kathy. She has something called Thondo's Shoes, where they make like foldable ballet flats. And sort of, it's really cool because she's customized it. She realizes that African women actually have a slightly wider foot. So she's kind of built that into the design of her shoes. They're like amazing. And for her, they were going to launch in December. You're going to get a big bump through Christmas. And there was a port strike in Nigeria. And her stuff was stuck in the ports until like February. I mean, what do you do then, right? You have, I mean, in Nigeria, for example, recently there was like a fuel crisis. And so suddenly maybe if you're a logistics business, you're like, well, I can't actually deliver this. There's no petrol in the country whatsoever. What do you do? So a lot of the times I think, when you're working oftentimes in emerging markets, there are things outside of your control. There are infrastructure issues, things that will go wrong. And I mean, yeah, you have to, so I think that you have to become very good at learning how to solve problems and being creative about the way in which I think you solve problems.
Definitely, and I suppose a lot of it just comes from actually learning by encountering those problems in the first place. Like you can kind of think they might come, that this might happen, but really until it actually happens.
For sure. And I think that another thing is also talking to people, like, build a network of other people who are building businesses, because a lot of the times, like, the problems that you're facing are not unique. Other people are going through them and have gone through them. So to the extent that you're actually able to sort of leverage some of that knowledge, why not? If you can't find people, Google can be your best friend, right? Go and find other examples of people who are building similar businesses. I mean, so many people tell their stories. I think it's sad because oftentimes in emerging markets, that happens less. But I mean, even if like maybe you're in Nigeria and you can't find someone who did it in Nigeria, maybe you can look at someone who's done something in India. And with things like LinkedIn now, like a lot of the times you can actually just send people a message and you'd be surprised by the number of people who actually respond and are happy to jump on a call with you and chat to you a little bit about their experiences.
And people also publish blogs on LinkedIn. And
Exactly.
And I was wondering, you talked about some of the setbacks maybe being with your team or with investors. Like, how do you, like, and again, we can't know until it actually happens. But how do you actually, have you had it, or have you ever seen other people who have had these problems with their team or with investors? Like, and how has that, how have they managed to kind of push through that problem?
Yeah, no, I mean, we had one of our entrepreneurs who investors said that they were going to give her money, and when it was time to collect that money, she said, oh no, macroeconomic changes have happened, and so I'm not able to invest anymore. And I mean, what could she do but continue to push and try to like find other people? I mean, in terms of your team, what I would always encourage people is like, a lot of times you just kind of want to build a team to build a team. You just want bodies in the room because it's like, oh, stuff needs to be done. But be very careful and strategic about the way you choose to work with people, because a lot of the times a bad team member can add so much work to your plate, because then you're not just doing your work, you're also kind of like managing them as well. So when people show you signs that they're not necessarily the best teammates, I would say like move. I'm not saying fire them straight away, but don't just continue to hang on to someone because you're like, oh, I just need someone to be there. A lot of the times it's best to kind of, we actually there's a really interesting podcast, which you can actually find on the She Leads Africa website. And it's a guy called Mark Essien, who started a company called hotels.ng. And he talks about how, look, he did something where he ended up maybe like firing like 50% of his staff. And, he was worried because he was like, oh my God, they were doing work. How are we going to get through the work that they were all doing? And you find that the really great people step up, and they take on more of like the workload. And a lot of the times you're able to kind of like adjust and manage through that. So I definitely recommend listening to his podcast because it's actually very interesting and kind of the experiences which he went through.
Yeah, I'll look out for that. Well, I think we're kind of coming to the end, and the last two questions are sort of already covered.
That is funny. I am indeed related to Keem. He's my dad, and I will pass on your greeting. And I see there's one about, do you have to have a proven track record before you make a pitch to investors? Yes, your business ideally. Again, I think I chatted about this earlier. It's a little bit dependent on the market. Some places you can sell just an idea, but if you can show traction, it is always better because it just makes a slightly more convincing argument. Again, think about yourself. If you were giving someone money, you would want to know that they have actually done something to show that this works, because everyone can make an idea sound cool. Execution is critical, but you don't necessarily have to have a proven track record as an entrepreneur. A lot of people can get funding as like a first-time entrepreneur, so I think it depends on sort of how you define track record.
Great. Well, I think that's a really good place to end, because that's where a lot of our students are at. And just to thank you again for taking the time for talking to us about your experience, and actually it's really been so interesting for me to hear as well.
Thank you guys so much for joining, and if anyone has any questions, please do shoot me an email. My email is just Yasmin at sheleadsafrica.org. I will get back to it. Sometimes I do get overwhelmed by emails, but I will definitely get back to it and just say, follow up from UWC course, in the subject line or something, and I will try to respond. And yeah, best of luck with everything that you're doing. I'm sure it's all really exciting. And thank you for listening. I talked to you for a really long time, so you guys pushed through it. That's really awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.